Imagine you are the kind of man who checks the tire pressure on his neighbor's cars without being asked. Not because you are warm. Not because you are the kind of person who volunteers for things or joins committees or brings casseroles when someone is sick, but because there is a correct tire pressure, and if the tire pressure is wrong, then something is wrong, and if something is wrong, then it needs to be fixed. And you are the kind of man who fixes things, because fixing things is the only language you have ever been fully fluent in. You have rules. The rules are not arbitrary. The rules are the accumulated wisdom of a life spent paying attention to the way things should work and the way people consistently fail to make them work that way. There's a way to drive through a residential area and a way not to. There is a correct method for sorting recycling. There is a time at which music should stop and a volume at which it should never have started. These are not opinions. These are facts. And the fact that other people treat them as opinions is the central frustration of your existence. You are 59 years old. You have been retired against your will. Your wife is dead. And every morning you wake up and the first thing you feel, before thought has fully arrived, is her absence, which is not a feeling so much as a condition, a permanent alteration of the atmosphere, a wrongness in the air of the room that no amount of correct tire pressure will ever fix. You have a plan. The plan is to join her. You have been working on the plan with the same methodical attention you bring to everything else. You have made arrangements. You have put things in order. You are ready. And then the new neighbors arrive, and they bring a cat, and nothing goes according to plan. This is a man called OVE, and Frederick Backman is doing something that requires enormous skill and enormous heart simultaneously. He is writing a book about grief and stubbornness, and the way love can outlast the person it was built around, and he is writing it as a comedy. Not a comedy that makes light of the darkness. A comedy that finds the light inside the darkness. A comedy that understands, with rare and generous precision, that the funniest thing about human beings is also the most moving thing, that we are ridiculous and serious simultaneously, that our dignity and our absurdity are inseparable, and that the people who love us most are often the people who see both at once and choose us anyway. Who was Frederick Backman when he wrote this book? A man called OVE began as a blog post. Backman was a journalist and blogger in Sweden, writing the kind of columns that are personal and observational and addressed to an audience that is known rather than imagined. He wrote a character, a grumpy man, principled to the point of impossible, furious at a world that could not meet his standards, and the character arrived so fully formed that the column became a short story, and the short story became a novel. He has said that OVE came from thinking about the people he knew who were written off as difficult, who were dismissed as grumpy or obstinate or unable to get along with others, and wondering what was underneath that, what a person who presents as impenetrable is protecting, what the rigidity is in service of, whether the exterior that makes someone hard to love is always the whole of them or whether it is sometimes, often, the scar tissue over something that loved and lost and never recovered. The book was published in Sweden in 2012 and was almost immediately a phenomenon. It became the best-selling Swedish novel of 2013 and 2014. The translation by Henning Koch arrived in English in 2014 and proceeded to sell millions of copies worldwide. It was adapted into a Swedish film that became one of the most internationally successful Swedish films in history. It was adapted again into an American film in 2022, with Tom Hanks in the title role. None of this success was predicted. It is the success of a book that found its audience through reading, through one person pressing it into another person's hands and saying, with the specific urgency of someone who has been genuinely moved, that they needed to read this. That it was about their father or their grandfather or their neighbor or themselves on a bad day or the person they were afraid of becoming. That it was funny and it was sad and it was about something real. Let us enter the world of the book. Ove Lindqvist lives in a row house at the end of a residential street in Sweden. He has lived there for many years. He knows every rule of the homeowners association because he wrote most of them and has enforced all of them since the day they were written. He does his inspection every morning. The same route, the same checks, the same inventory of violations and near violations, and the simmering awareness that without his vigilance, the entire neighborhood would descend into a chaos of incorrect parking and improperly sorted recycling from which it might never recover. He drives a Saab. This is not incidental. OVE drives a Saab and has always driven a Saab, and the question of Saab versus Volvo is not, for OVE, a question of automotive preference. It is a question of character. It is a question of what kind of person you are and whether you are the kind of person who can be trusted. It is, in the specific logic of OVE's world, a moral position. He is recently retired, not voluntarily. The company he worked for 30 years has replaced him with someone younger who uses computers and talks about efficiency and does not know how to do anything with his hands. OVE was good with his hands. OVE could fix anything. And a world that no longer needs him to fix things is a world that is telling him, in the only language he speaks fluently, that he is finished. Sonia is dead. She has been dead for 6 months. She was his wife for 38 years and the only person who ever looked at him the way she looked at him, not past the difficulty or around it or in spite of it, but directly at it, understanding it, choosing him anyway. She saw, in the man who checked tire pressures and enforced parking regulations and had a position on every topic that admitted no revision, a person worth loving. And she was right. And she is gone. And OVE's plan, the methodical, arranged, completely in character plan to join her, is interrupted on its first attempt by the arrival of Parvinet and Patrick, and their 2 daughters, and their complete inability to reverse a trailer into a parking space without assistance. OVE assists, not warmly, furiously, in the specific way of a man who cannot watch something being done incorrectly without intervening regardless of what he was in the middle of doing. And in the intervention, something begins. Now we go to the heart of it. The central tension of a man called OVE is not whether OVE will succeed in his plan to die. It is whether the world, which turns out to be considerably more persistent and considerably more populated with people who need things from him than he accounted for in the plan, will give him sufficient reason to abandon it. The interruptions arrive with the comic timing and the emotional precision of a writer who understands that life does not respect the schedules of people who are trying to leave it. Every time OVE approaches the completion of his plan, something requires his attention. The new neighbors need help. The cat appears. A young man arrives who needs somewhere to go. An old friend is in danger of losing his home. The situations are simultaneously absurd and completely real, and Bachman's skill is in holding both registers at once. But underneath the comedy is the grief, and Bachman never allows the comedy to cover the grief so completely that it disappears. The Sonia chapters, the flashbacks to OVE's life before the book begins, to the man he was when she was alive, and the man he was in the process of becoming before life made him what he is, are the book's most important structural decision. They arrive between the present tense chapters, slowly, building the picture of the person that the grumpy neighbor in the present tense contains. We learn about his father, the man who taught OVE how to fix things, who treated work as the primary expression of integrity, who died and left OVE alone at 16 with the understanding that the world was a problem to be solved and the solution was to be useful. We learn about the job, the long years of competence and reliability that constituted OVE's contribution to the world. We learn about the moment he met Sonia, on a train, at a time when he was not looking for anyone, in the specific way that the most important things always arrive when you have not prepared for them. And we learn about Sonia herself, who she was, how she loved him, the specific and patient intelligence with which she understood what was underneath the difficulty and chose, with full information, to stay. She was not a saint. She was not defined entirely by her relationship to OVE. She had her own life, her own passions, her own way of moving through the world that was entirely separate from the way she loved her husband. But the way she loved him, the specificity of it, the endurance of it, the way it saw past everything that made him hard and found the person inside, is the emotional core of the entire novel. Bachman gives us Sonia's love for OVE through the flashbacks, and then he asks us to understand the present tense OVE, the man who cannot speak to people without alienating them, who has turned his grief into rigidity, who walks his inspection route every morning because the route is the only thing that still exists from the life he was living when she was alive, as the same person. The man who loved her, who was loved by her, who does not know who he is without her because the self that existed before she existed was incomplete, and the self that existed with her is the only self he has ever been fully, and the self he is now, without her, is something he does not recognize and cannot inhabit. That is what is underneath the tire pressure checks. That is what the rules are for. Bachman writes, in one of the novel's most quietly devastating passages, that OVE had always been different from others, that he was born with a full sense of how things ought to be and an inability to make peace with the way they actually were. And that Sonia was the one person in his life who did not try to change this about him, who did not find it exhausting or impossible, but simply, cheerfully, loved him for it. When she died, the one accommodation the world had ever made for exactly who he was died with her. Let us talk about what this book is really saying. The first great theme is the love that outlasts everything, including its own reason to exist. OVE's love for Sonia does not diminish after her death. It does not soften or fade or become manageable with time. It remains at full force, unchanged, with nowhere to go, the most faithful description of grief that is possible, which is that grief is love with no destination. The feeling persists because the feeling was real. The object is gone. The feeling does not know where else to be. Bachman is arguing, through every chapter of OVE's present tense life, that the capacity to love this completely, to love someone in a way that reorganizes your entire existence around them and continues after they are gone with no reduction in force, is not a weakness. It is not a pathology or a failure to move on or a problem to be solved with therapy. It is the consequence of having loved correctly. And loving correctly, the book insists, is worth the cost, even when the cost is this. The second great theme is the life story visible only in retrospect. The OVE we meet in the present tense is easy to dismiss. He is rude and rigid and exhausting, and the neighbors who have not known him long enough to have any history with him find him simply difficult. He is the man who is written off. The grumpy old neighbor whose death, when it eventually comes, will be mourned mostly by the people who are relieved not to have to deal with him anymore. And the flashbacks dismantle this reading completely. They reveal, gradually and with enormous care, that the man who is easy to dismiss is a man who has lived with more integrity and more love and more genuine commitment to the people who depended on him than most of the people who find him difficult have managed in their entire lives. He helped people. He showed up. He fixed things. He loved his wife with a completeness and a fidelity that the modern world has almost no language for anymore. The gap between who OVE appears to be and who OVE is the book's argument about the stories we tell about people based on limited information, about what we miss when we write someone off, about the entire interior life, the complete history of a complete person that exists behind every face we have decided we already understand. The third great theme is the community that forms around difficulty. The people who accumulate in OVE's life over the course of the novel do not gather because he is easy to be around. They gather because he is reliable, because he knows how to do things, because he is present in the specific, unglamorous, showing up way that is the most important form of presence and the least acknowledged. Parvene understands him before anyone else in his present life does. She sees, almost immediately, that the rudeness is not the whole of him, that the person who tells her husband he is revering the trailer incorrectly and then demonstrates the correct method is also the person who will, without being asked, without making a production of it, be there when something actually goes wrong. She is not intimidated by his difficulty. She is interested in what is underneath it. And her interest, the simple, persistent, completely unsentimental interest of a person who has decided to know someone properly, is what saves OVE. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a revelation, but incrementally, one casserole and one favor and one demanding visit at a time. Now let us look at these characters as the people they truly are. Ove Lindqvist is one of the great characters in contemporary fiction, not because he is exceptional. He is in many ways the opposite of exceptional, a man of modest circumstances and modest ambitions whose only distinction is the completeness with which he committed to the things he believed in. But because Bachman renders him with such precision and such compassion that the reader's relationship with him, undergoes the same transformation that Parvinet's does, beginning with the recognition of difficulty and arriving at something much closer to love. The key to OVE is that his rigidity is not the opposite of feeling. It is feeling with nowhere to go. He feels everything, he always has, and the world has not provided him with a sufficient language for what he feels, so he has redirected it into rules. Into the tire pressure checks and the parking regulations, and the correct method for assembling flat-pack furniture. These are not compensations for an absence of feeling. They are the only available expression of a surplus of it. Sonia is the novel's great absence and its greatest presence. She appears only in the flashbacks, in the past tense, in memory, in the reconstruction of who she was through OVE's experience of loving her. And yet she is on every page, because OVE is on every page, and OVE is, in some fundamental and irrevocable way, a man who was made by being loved by her. The specificity with which Bachman renders her laugh, her stubbornness, her career, her opinions, her particular way of engaging with the world, prevents her from being simply a symbolic good wife. She is a person. The fact that she exists in the novel only in memory makes the memory more precise rather than less. Parvinet is the book's engine in the present tense. She is exactly the right character to be placed in OVE's life at this moment, someone who is not Swedish, who did not grow up with OVE's specific cultural context for rigidity and silence, who brings to her interactions with him a cheerful refusal to interpret his difficulty as rejection. She does not take his rudeness personally, because she does not have the cultural equipment for the specific form his rudeness takes. She simply experiences it as a communication style and communicates back in her own. This is comic, and it is also the book's most pointed observation about the way new relationships that do not have the history to make assumptions, can sometimes reach a person that old relationships, laden with their own established patterns, cannot. Parvinet has no idea who OVE used to be. She only knows who he is in front of her. And who he is in front of her, she has decided, is worth knowing. Cat deserves mention not as a comic device, but as a genuine character element, the thing that gives OVE a reason to get up in the morning before Parvinet and her family give him more reasons. The cat chooses him. The cat's stubborn, unglamorous, completely unemotional attachment to him. It does not like him. Exactly, it simply keeps appearing on his doorstep, is Bachman's most economical statement of the book's central argument. Sometimes the love that saves you is not the love you chose. Sometimes it is the love that simply refuses to leave. What has this book done in the world? A Man Called OVE did something that is very difficult for a novel to do. It changed how a significant number of people thought about a specific type of person. The reader who finishes this book and then encounters a difficult, rigid, difficult-to-like older man in their own life is a different reader than the one who started it. They have been given a set of questions to ask instead of a dismissal to make. What is underneath this? What did this person love? What did they lose? What are the rules protecting? This is the most direct form of empathy that fiction can generate. Not the empathy of being asked to feel for someone like you, but the empathy of being shown the complete interior life of someone who appears to be nothing like you and discovering, in that complete picture, the shared human structure underneath the different surfaces. The book's global success, translated into more than 40 languages, selling millions of copies across multiple continents, is a form of data about what this type of story provides. It provides recognition. Readers everywhere recognized OVE, which means readers everywhere knew someone like OVE, which means the type, the difficult person whose difficulty is protecting something precious, is universal. The specific details are Swedish. The human structure is not. The two film adaptations are interesting in what they reveal about the book's translatability. The Swedish adaptation was praised for its fidelity to the tone, the specific Nordic quality of OVE's expression and the world he lives in. The American adaptation with Tom Hanks was praised for demonstrating that the story survived transplantation, that OVE's essential nature was not culturally specific, but something that could be recognized in any culture where people close themselves off and someone else decides to open them anyway. Now let me be honest with you. A Man Called OVE is a book that some readers will find sentimental. The charge is fair. If sentimental means that the book is not ashamed of its emotional aims and pursues them directly rather than obliquely. Bachman wants you to cry. He earns the crying through the accumulation of genuine character work rather than through manipulation, but he is not pretending to be doing something other than what he is doing. If you are the kind of reader who requires fiction to arrive at its emotion sideways, at an angle, never looking directly at the thing it is reaching for, this book will feel too direct. The structure is less complex than Anxious People. The nonlinearity of the flashbacks is the primary formal interest, and it is well executed, but the novel does not attempt the same kind of structural ambition. It is a character study before it is anything else. The plot exists to give the character occasions to reveal himself. For some readers, this is the form at its purest. For readers who need plot momentum, it requires the patience to trust that the character is sufficient. The comedy is consistent and genuine throughout, but it modulates significantly as the book progresses. The early sections are primarily comic. The middle sections add the emotional weight of the backstory. The final sections are operating in a different register entirely, still recognizably Bachman's voice, still occasionally funny, but carrying a weight that the opening chapters only hint at. This modulation is a formal achievement. It is also a commitment the reader has to make, to stay with the comedy long enough for the weight to arrive and mean what it means. Who should read this book? Anyone who has written off someone difficult before learning their story. Anyone who has lost someone so fundamental to their existence that the loss felt like an alteration of physics rather than a biographical event. Anyone who has tried to be useful as a substitute for being present and has not yet understood why it is not the same thing. Read it if you have a person in your life who is hard to love and you want a book that will ask you to try harder. Read it if you loved someone who is gone and need a story that treats that love as permanent rather than as something that should have a resolution. Read it if you need to be reminded that the person behind the difficulty is never the difficulty, that there is always something more, something real, something worth the effort of finding out. We reach the end. Frederick Bachman wrote A Man Called OVE because he wanted to know what was underneath the impossible people. He wanted to write a love story about a man who did not know how to show love and a woman who knew how to receive it anyway, and a neighborhood that was saved by the accidental overflow of a love that had nowhere else to go. He wanted to write a book that would make the reader look at the difficult person in their own life. The rigid one, the rule follower, the one who seems to have no capacity for warmth or accommodation or the small social lubricants that make ordinary life bearable, and wonder what they have lost and how long they have been carrying it and what they are protecting behind all of that difficulty. OVE is alive at the end of this book in a way he was not alive at the beginning. Not alive in the trivial sense of continuing to exist. Alive in the sense of being present in the world rather than simply occupying space in it while he waits for the world to let him leave. He has been pulled back, not dramatically, not against his will, but by the accumulation of small necessities that turned out to be larger than they appeared. A neighbor who needed a trailer parked. A cat that would not go away. A young man who needed a place to sleep. A friend in danger. A child being born. The ordinary traffic of a life that is lived among people, which is the only place lives can be lived, and which provides, if you stay long enough and pay attention, sufficient reason to keep living it. Sonia knew this about him before he did. She knew that underneath the rules and the rigidity and the difficulty was a man of enormous capacity for love, specific, practical, unglamorous, completely reliable love, and that if she could just keep him in the world long enough, the world would eventually find a use for it. She was right. She was always right. He just needed the neighbors to arrive. And the cat. And the whole impossible, infuriating, occasionally unbearable, always worth it project of being a person among other people who need things from you and will not leave you alone long enough to finish your plan. That is what saved OVE. That is what saves most of us. Not the dramatic intervention, not the speech at the right moment, not the single perfect act of love that resolves everything. Just the neighbor at the door, the cat on the step, the ordinary, persistent, completely unremarkable fact that other people exist and need things and will keep knocking even when you have decided you are done with all of that. Keep knocking. For the people who have decided they are done, keep knocking. You have no idea what you might interrupt.